The light was going fast. I had maybe 15 minutes before the porch would be too dark for the lens I had, so I sat still in the driver's seat, with the window cracked and the engine off, and watched the cabin through the tree line. My elbow was braced on the door. The camera sat in my lap. I'd been there 40 minutes already. The cabin was a nice one, for what it was. One story, wood-sided, a porch that ran the full front face of it, a light over the door, and another inside behind a curtain that threw a yellow rectangle onto the boards. I could hear the lake somewhere behind it, but couldn't see it from where I was parked. Off the access road, half onto the dirt shoulder with the truck nosed into the brush. A white SUV sat in the gravel lot beside the cabin. I'd been looking at it long enough that I knew the plate by memory. I'd been out to this access road once before, 2 weeks earlier, just to learn the layout. That time I hadn't gotten out of the truck. I just sat and looked at it in daylight and drove back home. This time I waited. I wasn't angry. That probably sounds wrong, but it's the truth. At that point, standing still had become the whole job. You go angry and you say something before you have what you need, and then they apologize and get more careful, and you end up with nothing but a fight and a spouse who now knows to cover their tracks. I'd watched enough people blow their own cases by moving too fast. I wasn't going to do that. The door opened. I put the camera up. They came out together. Holly first, then him behind her, and she turned back to say something, and he was grinning at whatever it was. She was in a gray zip-up I'd bought her 2 Christmases ago. He had his hand on the small of her back. They stopped at the porch railing, and she leaned into him, and he said something close to her ear, and she laughed, and then she turned her face up, and he kissed her. It wasn't a peck. It wasn't ambiguous. It was a long, comfortable kiss, the kind you don't do with someone you're still performing for. They'd been doing this long enough to be easy about it. I took the shot, then 3 more. I lowered the camera and checked the screen. Clean, sharp enough. Her face was fully visible. His profile was clear. You could read it one way and one way only. I sat there another minute while they went back inside. I wasn't shaking. My hands were steady. I was mostly just noting, in some small, dry part of my brain, that this was a better photo than I'd expected for the light. Then, I set the camera on the passenger seat and started the truck and pulled out of the brush and back onto the access road. His name was Brent. He worked in her department, or adjacent to it, some project coordination role where they'd been in the same orbit for about a year. I'd met him once at a company picnic. He'd had a firm handshake and a good smile, and had said something forgettable about how great Holly was to work with. I'd said thanks for some reason, like it was a compliment to me. She called these weekends her spa trips, spa weekends. Her and her best friend Amber, decompressing from the grind, a little self-care, back Sunday night. 7 of them in 10 months. 7. I drove home with the photos on the camera and the camera on the seat beside me, and thought about what I still needed before I could actually move. The photos were proof of the affair. They weren't proof of the cover story and who helped run it. They weren't proof of dates and patterns. They were the end of a chain, and I needed the rest of the chain to come with it. I thought about the iPad. That's where this actually started. That was 2 weeks ago, and that was the moment when something I'd been half sensing and mostly ignoring became a thing I couldn't look away from anymore. The cabin, the camera, the 40 minutes in the dark, all of it started with a dead iPad, and my wife asking me to wipe it before she donated it. She left it on the kitchen counter on a Saturday morning with a Post-it stuck to the front. Won't turn on. Can you wipe it before I drop it off? I work for a cable company. I run fiber installs, troubleshoot home networks, occasionally do things to equipment that the manual says shouldn't be done. The point is, a tablet that won't turn on is not a complicated problem. I plugged it into the charger on my workbench in the garage and walked back inside and drank most of my coffee before I went back to check on it. It turned on. Dead battery. That was the whole problem. I left it on the charger, came back in an hour, and it was sitting there at 63% with the lock screen up. I entered the PIN. Holly used the same 4 digits for everything, our anniversary month and year, which I was now finding darkly funny, and it opened right up. I was going to do a factory reset. That was the job. But it was connected to the charger, and I figured I'd let it charge to 100 while I did a quick backup check, just to make sure there wasn't anything on it that needed to come off first. So I connected it to my phone's hotspot and let it pull updates and sync. It synced her messages. Not current messages. The app was an older third-party one, the kind Holly had stopped using when she switched phones, but it was still logged in. It had been frozen since the last time she'd used this device, and now that it had a connection again, it updated itself. Pulled in about 8 months of old threads. I scrolled without really thinking about what I was looking for, and then I found the thread with Amber and stopped. It took me a few minutes to understand what I was reading. Not because it was written in code or anything clever. It was actually pretty straightforward once you knew what you were looking at. But it took a minute to accept what it was. They had a system. They had worked it out together, the two of them. And it was specific. There was a shared folder somewhere. The messages referenced it by a nickname that contained spa photos, stock images, looked like, or maybe photos from an actual trip years ago. Neither Nathan nor Rick would know the difference. The system was, Amber sent a photo to Holly, Holly sent it to me. Holly sent one to Amber, Amber sent it to Rick. Staggered timing so neither husband got the same image at the same moment and thought to compare notes. Each photo had a caption ready to go. Loving this facial. The massage therapist here is incredible. About to do the hot stone thing. Wish me luck. There were at least 15 or 20 photos in the rotation. Maybe more. I scrolled back far enough to find the beginning of the system. One message from Amber that said, "Okay, here's what I think we do," and then a long explanation. Holly's response was 2 words. You're a genius. I sat on my workbench stool for a while. Then I did something I hadn't planned on doing. I screenshot everything. Every message in that thread that mattered. Sent them to myself, deleted the sent message, connected the iPad back to the charger, and went inside. Holly was in the living room watching something. I made coffee. She asked how the iPad was doing, and I told her the battery was dead and that I'd have it ready by tomorrow. She thanked me, and I said yep. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was devastated exactly, or not only that. My brain was trying to be practical before it was anything else. It was calculating. She had a spa weekend coming up, 3 weeks out. I thought about the thread. They'd mentioned a location once, in an earlier message. Amber had written something like, same place, Uncle's cabin. He never uses it before Memorial Day. I hadn't known what uncle or what cabin, but I knew Amber, and I knew her maiden name, and I knew enough about how to look things up. It took me about 40 minutes online to find a property registered to a man with Amber's family name, about 2 hours north, on a lake. I went out to the access road the following Saturday to look at it, just to know where it was. And then I started watching Holly's phone. We'd set up a family locator app 2 years earlier. Her idea, actually, after I was late getting home from a job and she'd worried. She never had any reason to turn it off, and so she never did. I opened it that first Friday night of what she called a spa weekend and watched her location pin sit on a spot 2 hours north, right where the cabin was, for 48 hours straight. She texted me a spa photo at 9 that night. The caption said she was about to get a massage. I told her to have fun. I watched her location and didn't say anything else. I did that 3 more weekends. Then I drove out with a camera. I knew Brent's last name because Holly had mentioned him exactly twice before any of this started. The first time was maybe 8 months ago, when she came home annoyed about a vendor meeting that had run long. She'd said something like, Brent from Caldwell's team just goes on in these things, and I'd said something sympathetic, and that was the end of it. The second time was when she showed me a group photo from some work happy hour and pointed to a few people. He was in the back row. I'd nodded and handed her phone back. That was enough. Full name on the company website, cross-referenced with a LinkedIn. From there, married, wife named Dana, 2 kids, house in Fielder Crest. I found her through him in about 10 minutes. I also looked at my cabin photos again. The ones from the first trip I'd watched. The one before I drove out with the camera. I'd gotten curious one of those earlier weekends and driven past the access road without stopping, and I'd caught a second car in the gravel lot. I'd had my phone out the window, more reflex than plan, and gotten a shot of it. That car wasn't Brent's SUV, so I pulled the photo up and ran the partial plate I'd caught, and it came back registered to a Gregory Whitmore. I didn't know that name, but I knew Amber's husband was Rick Solis, because Holly and Amber had been friends for 6 years, and Rick had been to our house for dinner 3 or 4 times. Gregory Whitmore wasn't Rick. I sat with that for about an hour. The shape of it was becoming clear. Holly had Brent. Amber had somebody named Gregory. And both of them had the same alibi. Built together, maintained together, each one covering for the other. It wasn't just Holly's affair. It was a system. Amber was as deep in it as Holly was, which meant Rick Solis was sitting in the same position I was, just without the photos. That was a Tuesday evening. I waited until Thursday to call Dana. I found her cell through a school directory. They had a kid in the district, and the contact sheet wasn't hard to get to. I called from my cell. No block, no strategy. Just called her. She picked up on the 3rd ring. I told her my name and that my wife worked with her husband, and that I was sorry to call out of nowhere, but I had some information I thought she deserved to hear. There was a long pause. Then she asked, very carefully, what kind of information? I told her the short version. Her husband and my wife, a lake cabin 2 hours north, a standing arrangement that had been running for the better part of a year. She said, okay, in a flat voice, and then asked me not to call back and hung up. I hadn't expected anything different. I emailed her the photos that night. 3 of the best ones from the porch, Holly's face clear, Brent's profile clear, the body language not remotely ambiguous. I wrote one sentence above them. I thought you should see these before you decided whether to call back. I didn't ask for anything. She called me the next morning at 7:45. Her voice was different, not soft, not broken. More like she'd spent the night moving from one phase to the next and had come out the other side of it into something harder. She asked how long I'd been watching. I told her. She asked if I had more photos. I said yes. She asked if I was planning to confront Holly. I said not, until I had everything I needed, and that I thought she deserved to be part of that conversation. What do you mean by everything? She asked. I said I meant I wanted to actually catch them, not just have photos of a porch kiss. I wanted the kind of proof that removes all the wiggle room. She was quiet for a second. Then she said she wanted that too. We talked for about 40 minutes. By the end of it, she'd agreed to wait and not say anything to Brent. I asked her to trust me on the timing. She said she wasn't sure she trusted anyone right now, but that she'd wait because she didn't have a better option. I told her there was one more thing. I explained about Amber and about Rick and about what I thought Rick didn't know yet. So it's both of them, she said. I said, yeah, both of them. She said she'd met Amber maybe twice at work functions. She didn't sound surprised. She sounded like someone recalibrating something she'd already half suspected but hadn't had a name for. Rick called me the following evening, which told me Dana had reached out to him herself. I hadn't asked her to do that. I'd been trying to figure out how to approach him, but I wasn't unhappy she had. His call was short. He said Dana had told him the situation, that there was a second person involved, that he and I were apparently in the same boat. His voice was level, quiet, the kind of quiet that's doing a lot of work underneath. He asked if I had proof. I said yes. He asked if he could see it. I said I'd send it over. I emailed him the partial plate photo and 3 others I'd taken that weekend, when I'd seen the second car and Amber leaving together, with a man I now knew was Gregory Whitmore. The photos weren't as clean as the ones I had of Holly and Brent, but they were enough. Amber's face, the way she had her arm through his. The car and the lot, he wrote back in 20 minutes. Just, thank you. What's the plan? I set up a call, all 3 of us, the following night. We talked for about an hour. They each had the same basic question. What were we waiting for? And the answer was simple. We were waiting for the next trip. Because the cabin was where everything happened, and the cabin was where we were going to end it. We agreed not to confront anyone before then. No hint, no changed behavior, no sudden coldness that might spook them into changing the plan. Dana said it was the hardest thing she'd ever agreed to do. Rick didn't say much. I said I knew how it felt to sit on it. We all did. We compared notes on the usual timing. Holly's trips ran Friday night to Sunday afternoon. They were predictable. She'd mentioned to me, casually, a week earlier, that she and Amber were thinking about doing another weekend soon. I'd said, that sounds nice. I'd wanted to put my fist through the wall, but I'd said, that sounds nice, and went back to watching TV. The next trip was coming. We just had to pick the right night to show up for it. We started comparing calendars in a group text the three of us had set up. No names in it, just initials, which in retrospect was probably overkill, but felt right at the time. Holly confirmed the trip on a Monday. She mentioned it at dinner like it was an afterthought. She and Amber were going to do a spa weekend, 3rd week of the month. She just wanted to give me a heads up. I said no problem. I asked if she knew yet which place they were going. She said probably the same one they always went to. She liked the hot stone massage there. She said it so smoothly I almost had to admire it. I texted Dana and Rick that night. Next trip confirmed, 3rd week. Dana wrote back in about 4 minutes. How do you want to do this? She asked. That became the question we spent the next few days working out. Rick was in favor of just driving up Friday night and confronting them at the door. Simple, direct. Dana was against it. She'd been against the simple version from the first phone call. She kept coming back to the same thing, which was that photos of a porch kiss were one thing, but she wanted something that couldn't be argued away in a deposition. She'd clearly been thinking about the legal end of this more than Rick or I had in those first days. I want video, she said. Something that shows exactly what's happening and who's there. No room for, it looks bad, but it wasn't what it seems. I thought about that. She was right. Photos were evidence of a moment. Video was evidence of a pattern in motion. It would show them together, in the cabin, in a way that closed every exit. And if things went the way I expected them to go once we walked through that door, video of the before, the footage from the tree line, would be important later, when lawyers started picking at timelines. I said I could do it. I knew the property well enough by now. I could get into the tree line on the south side, closer than last time, with my phone set to record before anyone moved. Long enough to establish who was there and what was happening. Then I'd signal Rick and Dana. Rick sent back one line. I just want to see it myself. I understood that. It's different, seeing it yourself. I'd stood in that tree line with a camera and gotten the photos, and still part of my brain had spent 2 weeks trying to build an alternate explanation out of nothing, because that's what your brain does when it doesn't want something to be true. Rick needed to see it, not for the lawyers, just for himself. So we worked out the shape of it. I'd go in first, get into position off the access road, and record for enough time to make the footage useful. Dana and Rick would wait by their cars until I signaled. Then I'd knock or open the door. I hadn't decided which yet, depended on whether it was unlocked, and they'd follow me in. I told them to stay back until I went in first. I didn't say why exactly, but they both understood. Whatever Brent's first reaction was going to be, I wanted it directed at me. Rick said he understood, but that he wasn't going to wait long. I said I wasn't asking him to. I started privately calling Brent slick right around this time. Not out loud, just in my own head when I was running through the plan or looking at his photo or imagining his face when the door opened. He had that quality, Slick did, good-looking in a low-effort way, confident in the specific manner of someone who'd never once thought they'd get caught. The company picnic handshake, the smile, the way you could tell he considered himself, without quite saying it, to be pretty good at life. I kept the name to myself, but I thought it a lot. The rest of that week was the strangest week I've had in recent memory. You go through your day, you make dinner. Holly packs a bag and you watch her do it, and she's chatting about whatever, and you're answering her questions and doing the dishes, and you're also completely somewhere else, running the logistics for the third time that hour without meaning to. It has the quality of a dream, the ordinary surface of everything, and underneath it, something you can barely hold. She asked me to help her load the car the Thursday before she left, her bag and a small cooler she'd packed. I carried the bag out. She kissed me on the cheek and said she'd be back Sunday. I said have a good time. I watched her back out of the driveway. Then I went inside and texted Rick and Dana, tomorrow night. Rick and Dana had driven up separately and were parked off the access road behind me, 2 cars back, headlights off. We hadn't talked since the drive up, just a single text from me when I left the house, and a thumbs up from each of them. The plan didn't need rehearsing anymore. We'd been over it enough times that it had worn grooves. I left my truck and went on foot through the brush along the south side of the property. The ground was soft and quiet. I'd worn dark clothes without thinking about it too hard. Not tactical, just practical. I wasn't trying to be a movie. I was trying to get close enough to the bedroom window without the outside light catching me. Both cars were in the gravel lot. His SUV and a second one I recognized as Amber's. The light in the main room was off. The bedroom light was on, visible at the edge of the curtain on the south-facing window, the one I'd clocked on my second visit out here when I'd walked the tree line in daylight to understand the layout. I moved to within maybe 12 feet of it and stopped behind a wide pine and stood still for a moment, listening. I could hear them. I didn't want to think about what I was hearing. I took my phone out and opened the camera and switched to video and pressed record and held it up toward the window. Not trying to film anything explicit, just establishing that the light was on, the cars were there, the voices were real, enough to build from. I held the angle for about 90 seconds. Then I tilted down and hit stop and checked the audio on the clip. Clear. I sent the signal. 2 texts, same message, one to Rick and one to Dana. Now. Then I went around to the front of the cabin and stood at the door. I'd thought about this moment a lot. What I'd do, what I'd feel, whether I'd hesitate. I'd told myself I wouldn't hesitate. Standing there with my hand on the door handle, I found out I was right. There was nothing to hesitate about anymore. I'd been patient for a long time. I was done being patient. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open and walked in. The main room was dim, just the spill of light from the hallway, and I crossed it in maybe 4 steps. The bedroom door was half open. I put my hand flat on it and pushed it the rest of the way. What I saw, in the order I saw it, Holly sitting up in bed, sheet pulled up, face turning toward the door with an expression of total incomprehension, like the image in front of her wasn't assembling into anything recognizable yet. And Brent, slick, coming off the far side of the bed fast, already on his feet, which told me he'd had half a second more warning than Holly. Maybe he'd heard me cross the main room. He was fast. I'll give him that. He got upright and he looked at me, and the first thing out of his mouth was, "Hey, hey, hey," in this tone, like he was trying to de-escalate a situation he was somehow a neutral party to, like I was the one who'd shown up somewhere unreasonably. That hey, hey, hey was the thing that did it, if I'm honest. Not the sight of him, not Holly's face. That tone, reasonable, managing, let's all calm down, from a man standing in a bedroom with my wife, in a cabin they'd been sneaking off to for the better part of a year. I closed the distance and hit him. I caught him across the left cheekbone with a right hand, and he went sideways into the nightstand, and the lamp came off it and hit the floor. He didn't go all the way down, caught himself on the wall, but his legs weren't under him right, and he put one hand up against the plaster to stay vertical. Behind me, I heard Rick and Dana come through the front door. Holly was making a sound I couldn't categorize. Not screaming, not words, something in between. She had the sheet bunched in both hands, and she was staring at me with an expression that was cycling through things too fast to read. "Nathan," she started, her voice breaking. "Nathan, it's—" "Don't," I said. Brent straightened up off the wall. His hand was at his face. He looked at me, and then past me at the door, And whatever he saw there, Rick coming in, Dana right behind him, seemed to recalibrate something for him. He'd thought this was one angry husband. Now he was counting people. Rick walked past me without a word, and in my peripheral vision, I saw him go left, toward the second bedroom, where the door was shut. He didn't run. He just moved with a very specific kind of purpose. He opened that door, and there was a shout from inside. Male voice, startled, and then the sounds of something physical happening. A crash, something against a wall. Not a long fight, short and definitive. Dana had stopped in the bedroom doorway. She was looking at Holly. Holly pulled the sheet up higher and said, "Dana," and Dana said nothing, just looked at her. Holly's face was doing something complicated. The bravado she'd started with, that reflexive Nathan, that was already gone. She was scanning the room, counting the same people Brent had just counted. Starting to understand that this wasn't just her husband finding out. This was something coordinated, something that had been built while she thought everything was still fine. I watched her figure that out. It took maybe 10 seconds, and it was its own kind of thing to see. Brent made a move. I don't know what he was trying to do, get past me, get to his clothes, get to a phone, but he pushed off the wall, and I stepped into him and shoved him back hard, and he hit the wall again, and this time he slid down it and sat on the floor and put both hands over his face. He was bleeding from just below his eye, where the cheekbone had caught the most of it. It wasn't dramatic. It was a cut, maybe an inch, leaking steadily. His hands were shaking. "Stay there," I said. He stayed there. From the other room, Rick's voice came through flat and even. "Get your stuff." Then a door. Then quiet. Dana turned to Holly. I don't know what she said. I wasn't listening anymore. I was looking at Brent sitting on the floor with his hands over his face, blood running between his fingers, and I was waiting to feel something about it. Satisfied, maybe, or sick, or both. What I felt was a kind of hollow stillness, like the sound after a phone call you've been dreading ends. Holly was crying. I know that because I could hear it behind me. I didn't turn around. I picked the lamp up off the floor and set it on the nightstand. That was a strange thing to do. I don't know why I did it. Force of habit, maybe. Fix what's broken, put things back where they go. Old reflex. The curtain near the window moved in a draft from the front door Rick had left open. Brent looked up at me from the floor. His eye was swelling. He didn't say anything. I didn't say anything either. In the other room, someone was crying harder now. Amber, I thought. Or maybe still Holly. Hard to tell. Dana's voice cut through at once, short and sharp, and then the crying got quieter. The cabin was a mess. A lamp on its cord, a nightstand shoved sideways, glass from something I hadn't tracked breaking, someone's shoes in the middle of the floor. I stood there in the middle of all of it and thought, okay, now it's over. She'd pulled on clothes. I'd turned away while she did it, not out of consideration, just because I didn't want to look at her. And when I turned back, she was standing near the foot of the bed with her arms crossed over her chest, which was a posture I recognized. It was the one she used when she was about to reframe something. "Nathan," her voice was careful, measured. "I need you to let me explain." I didn't say anything. "I know what you think you saw," she started. "I have video," I said, cutting her off. That stopped her. Just for a second, but it stopped her. Her eyes moved to my phone and then back to my face. "From before I came in," I continued, "and audio." She recalculated. I could see it happening. The thing about Holly is, she's not stupid. That was never the problem. She'd built and maintained a 7-trip alibi system with enough operational discipline that I might never have found it if she hadn't handed me that iPad. So when I said video and audio, she understood immediately what that meant and what it didn't leave room for. She shifted. "Okay," she said, her voice dropping. "Okay, can we talk about this somewhere private? Just us? Before anything else happens?" "No," I answered. "Nathan, 12 years," she pressed. "I know how long it's been," I said. She looked at me for a moment. Her eyes were wet, but her jaw was set, and there was something almost businesslike in her expression, which told me she hadn't fully given up on finding a lever that worked. That was the thing I kept noticing. Even now, she was still looking for the angle. It wasn't. She stopped, started again. This wasn't supposed to be what it became. It just, "Holly." I said it the way you'd say stop. She stopped. Brent was still on the floor. He'd moved from sitting against the wall to sitting with his knees up, forearms resting on them, looking at a spot on the carpet about 3 feet in front of him. The cut under his eye had slowed. He'd said exactly nothing since I'd told him to stay there, and I respected that, in a very limited sense. He'd read the room correctly, which may have been the only intelligent decision he made all year. There was nothing for him to say. He knew it. He stayed quiet and looked at the floor. I didn't speak to him. There wasn't a version of this where I needed anything from Brent. In the main room, Amber was talking to Rick. I couldn't hear the words clearly from where I was standing, just the shape of it. Her voice low and effortful, working through something, trying to find purchase. Rick's voice came back once, quiet and short, and then nothing, just Amber again. Then silence. Rick appeared in the bedroom doorway. He looked at me and gave a small nod. Not a happy one, not a dramatic one, just an acknowledgement, something confirmed. He'd gotten what he came for, same as me, and now there was nothing left to do here. He walked back out. Holly watched him go and then looked at me. "Can we please just—" she started, her voice cracking. "I'm not asking you to forgive me right now. I'm asking for 10 minutes. "The video's backed up," I replied. "To 2 places, in case that's something you're thinking about." Her expression shifted. That one landed somewhere real. "Nathan," she tried again. "I'll be at the house Sunday night to get some things," I said. "I'd appreciate it if you weren't there." She stared at me. Something behind her eyes was trying to find the version of this where it still came back from the edge, where there was still a seam to work. She'd spent a long time being good at finding those seams, but there wasn't one here. She could see that now, I think, actually see it, and watching her understand that was quieter than I'd expected it to be. Not satisfying exactly, just final. She sat down on the end of the bed and put her face in her hands. I went into the main room. Amber was sitting on the couch with her elbows on her knees, staring at the floor the same way Brent had been. She didn't look up when I came through. I didn't say anything to her. Her situation with Rick was their business, not mine. She'd made her choices. So had Holly. So had both men in those rooms. Everybody in that cabin had made a long series of choices, and they were all going to live with them now. I wasn't responsible for sorting it out. I walked out the front door. Dana was in the gravel lot, standing outside her car, phone to her ear. She turned when she heard the door and held up one finger, "Give me a second," and went back to the call. I heard her say yes. "I understand it's after hours," and then no. "I need to speak to someone tonight." She had her keys in her other hand, and she was calm in the way someone is calm when they've already made the decision and are just executing it now. Rick was in his car. Engine off. He was looking straight ahead through the windshield at the tree line. I walked past, and he didn't turn his head. I got in my truck. I sat there for a minute in the dark. The cabin light was still on inside. I could see it around the edge of the door I'd left open. Nobody had come out yet. Probably nobody knew what to do next, in there, and I found I didn't have any interest in waiting to see how they figured it out. I started the truck. Dana was still on the phone. She gave me a small wave as I pulled past her in the gravel. I lifted 2 fingers off the steering wheel. Then I was on the access road, then the highway, then nothing but flat dark and my headlights, and 2 hours back to a house I was going to have to figure out what to do with. I didn't turn the radio on. I didn't call anyone. I drove. Dana filed 4 days after the cabin. She'd had an attorney on the phone before she left the gravel lot, and by Monday morning she had an appointment, and by Thursday the paperwork was moving. She texted me once to let me know. I wrote back that I was glad she had what she needed, and she replied that she did, and that was more or less the last time we spoke. We weren't friends, exactly. We were two people who'd needed the same thing at the same moment and had helped each other get it. That was enough. I didn't need it to be more than that. Brent went back to work Monday with a swollen eye and a cut that had scabbed over into something that wasn't easy to explain away. He worked in the same building as Holly. People notice things. People talk. I don't know exactly what version of events circulated through their office that week, but I know that by Wednesday, his manager had called him in for a conversation, and I know that whatever professional credibility he'd built in that role, whatever version of slick he'd been performing for his coworkers, took damage he wasn't going to be able to walk back. He hadn't lost his job, last I heard, but there's a difference between keeping your job and keeping your standing, and he'd lost the second one. That tends to be its own slow consequence. Holly moved out of our house before I filed. She didn't fight me on the house, which I'd expected her to. I think she understood by the end that fighting me on anything was going to require her to dispute evidence she knew existed and couldn't disappear. The settlement was clean. My attorney was efficient. Holly got what she'd contributed and left everything else where it was. She was living with her sister for a few months and then, from what I understood secondhand, she moved out of state. I didn't ask where. I didn't need to know. Rick moved out the same night we drove back from the cabin. He went to a hotel, then to a short-term rental, then to an apartment. He filed about 3 weeks after I did. He and Amber apparently had almost no direct conversation about any of it. No tearful confrontation. No request for an explanation. Rick had seen what he'd gone up there to see, and it had answered every question he had, and he wasn't interested in Amber's version of events. He just left. His attorney did the talking from there. I've run into him once since, at a hardware store, and we talked for maybe 5 minutes. He seemed okay, quieter than before, maybe, but okay. I didn't ask about Amber and he didn't bring her up. We talked about his new apartment having old pipes, and I told him what to look for. That was the whole conversation. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of town about 6 weeks after the cabin. I didn't need 2 bedrooms, but the rent wasn't much different from the 1-bedroom, and I figured I'd use the space. I set up the second room as an office. I put my workbench stuff in there, my tools, a decent monitor. It's quiet. The building has a laundry room on the ground floor and a parking lot with good lighting and neighbors who mostly keep to themselves. It's fine. It's actually fine. Some nights I'd sit in the office with something on the monitor and think about the 12 years and try to locate the exact point where it had stopped being real. Whether there was a moment, a specific one, where something shifted and she'd started looking elsewhere. I'd go looking for it and I'd never find it, not exactly, which I eventually decided was information in itself. Maybe there wasn't a moment. Maybe it was just incremental, just a slow drift that neither of us named until she'd drifted all the way to someone else. Maybe the marriage had been over for a while before the spa weekends started. I don't know. I'm not sure it matters for practical purposes. What I know is this. She handed me a broken iPad and asked me to wipe it, and it wasn't broken, and I didn't wipe it. That's the whole thing, when you strip it down. I stopped tracking any of them. I mean that literally. I deleted the Family Locator app, removed myself from every shared account, unfollowed every mutual contact who was going to keep me adjacent to Holly's life or Amber's. Not dramatically, I just stopped. No group texts, no courtesy check-ins, no, "I heard you're doing well" messages. If something was happening in their lives, I was no longer the audience for it. That's not a policy I had to work to maintain. It just became true. I don't know what Brent's doing now. I know what he was doing last fall, and I have excellent documentation of it, and that's sufficient. A few months out, I was eating dinner at the kitchen counter. Actual dinner, not cereal. I'd made a point of that. And I noticed that the apartment was quiet in a way that used to feel like something was missing, and now just felt like quiet. That's not a dramatic shift. It doesn't come with a revelation or a moral. It's more like one day you notice the adjustment has already happened without you scheduling it. The camera's in the closet. I haven't needed it since. The photos and video are on a drive in the office, backed up in 2 places, Same as I told Holly that night in the cabin. I don't look at them, I don't need to look at them. They did their job, and now they just sit there on a drive in a labeled folder, and occasionally I'm aware they exist, and then I go back to whatever I was doing. I think about that night sometimes. The window, the curtain, the light. The sound of the door going in. Brent hitting the wall and looking up at me from the floor, his eye already closing, not saying a word. I made the right calls. Start to finish, I made the right calls. That doesn't fix anything. But it's not nothing either. It's the thing I got to keep.